Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Death's Kiss, a Daidoji Shin mystery, by Josh Reynolds, narrated by Kaipo Schwab. Chapter 1, Foxfire Theater. Daidoji Shin raised a cup of tea to his lips. A sudden clatter of falling wood interrupted him mid-sip, and the hot liquid scalded his tongue. Sighing, he set the cup down carefully. Around him, the interior of the Foxfire Theater echoed with the sound of labor. Tradesmen moved back and forth across the stage, carrying tools and planks. Above them, laborers maneuvered new roof beams into place. Down in the benches, artisans argued over the placement of various cosmetic additions. Shin sat in his private box, on a cushioned bench that still smelt slightly of smoke. The theater no longer resembled the burnt-out ruin it had been only a few short months ago, nor did it look as it once had. Instead, the theater's new owner had decided to make some, in Shin's opinion, long-needed improvements, including an extension of the stage, an expansion to the changing areas, and a complete refurbishment of the backstage area. It was all very expensive, but necessary for future success. Or so Shin assured anyone who cared to ask about such things. In its heyday, the theater had been infamous for its ribald performances and riotous patrons. More recently, it had fallen on difficult times, hosting a succession of largely uninspiring kabuki troupes for dwindling audiences. After it had been gutted by a sudden fire, Shin had purchased the smoldering ruin from its previous owner and set about renovating it. The idea of owning his own theater, which had seemed positively brilliant at the time, had lost some of its luster in the interim, but he was confident that his enthusiasm would be rekindled once the renovations were complete. His eyes flicked down to the stack of ledgers that sat before him, on the small writing table he'd had brought up. The ledgers contained the financial records for the theater, and he'd been working diligently to make sense of them for the better part of a month. So far, he'd made little headway. The theater was suspended in a web of debt that kept it unprofitable and yet somehow functional. Despite his best efforts, Shin yearned for a distraction, something, anything, to take him away from the mess he'd made for himself, preferably somewhere far away, and for long enough that the matter would sort itself out. Sighing again, he opened the uppermost ledger and began to scan the page. "I simply must protest, my lord. It is not fitting that a man of your station be seen in such surroundings." The statement was delivered with modest and subtle venom, as was appropriate for a courtier speaking to one who was nominally his superior. Shin looked up, gave a thin smile, and fixed the speaker with a heavy-lidded gaze. Junichi Kenzo was a narrow needle of a man, dressed in blue with a face like a hatchet and the pinched expression of one who expects only disappointment. He'd been sitting quietly, if impatiently, since he'd been ushered into Shin's box moments earlier. Shin, somewhat unkindly, had decided to let him stew for a bit. Shin closed the ledger and deftly squared it atop the others before him. Similar to his guest, he was clad in a kimono of the finest blue silk, though his was emblazoned with a pattern designed to draw the eye of even the most casual observer. His white hair was pulled back from his narrow, handsome features, but a few strands were left free so as to frame his face just so. He took great pains to ensure that he cut an attractive, if somewhat rakish figure. "And what surroundings might those be, Master Kenzo?" He picked up his fan and snapped it open. The spokes were made from steel, and they made a pleasing hiss as he extended them. If Kenzo noticed, he gave no sign. Then, being a courtier himself, perhaps he was familiar with iron fans and their myriad uses. Kenzo frowned deeply. "Forgive me, but the air is full of dirt and noise, my lord. Why, I even overheard one of the laborers cursing a few moments ago." "How dreadful for you," Shin said, in his most sympathetic tones. He paused. "Though I do believe the individual in question had dropped something heavy on his foot only a moment prior." "That is no excuse." "Indeed not. Sadly, standards are not what they were." "If that is the case, might I ask, Why you insisted on meeting here, my lord?" Kenzo indicated their surroundings with a twitch of his chin. Shin wondered if Kenzo had ever been inside a theater before. Though the Crane prided themselves on being patrons of the arts, not all of them appreciated such things. Shin sat back, fanning himself. "I confess, Master Kenzo, that I find being amidst all this clamor somewhat invigorating. There's something poetic about the sounds of tradesmen as they set their shoulders to the wheel of progress, don't you agree?" Kenzo had no reply to this. Shin took the opportunity to study him more closely. He knew Kenzo's type well. A petty man, looking for any opportunity to impress his betters and amaze his subordinates. Not a bully, just officious and somewhat obnoxious. Unfortunately, he was also seneschal to Shin's grandfather. As such, he spoke with the voice of the Daidoji Trading Council. Shin took a sip of his now cool tea, grimaced, and signaled for the servant lurking at the door to refresh the cup. Kenzo placed his hand over his own cup, as the servant made to do the same for him. "Be that as it may, surely you have others capable of dealing with such matters." Disapproval punctuated every word as he spoke. Ever since his arrival almost a week ago, Kenzo had made clear his feelings, as well as those of Shin's grandfather, about this latest business venture. Since no directive to cease in his current preoccupation had accompanied Kenzo's arrival, Shin had decided to endure the other man's displeasure with all the good grace and humor he could muster, though it was waning fast. He fancied that Kenzo would eventually wander home to report on what would be deemed Shin's latest foolishness. It was simply a matter of weathering the storm. He laid his palm flat on the topmost ledger and said, "Is that an offer, Master Kenzo? I have heard that you have quite the head for financial matters. Indeed, I am told that my grandfather often seeks your advice on such things." Kenzo, as Shin had hoped, swelled slightly at this. "It is true, my lord. I am quite familiar with the pecuniary side of things. That is why I am here, after all. To inspect your finances, with your permission, of course, my lord." He ducked his head, as if suddenly recalling that Shin was his superior, in affectation, but one Shin appreciated. "But of course you have my permission, Master Kenzo." Shin spoke as if it had never occurred to him to consider otherwise. In fact, it was something of a nuisance. Kenzo was ostensibly acting on behalf of the council. In reality, he'd been sent to spy on Shin and find out why he was no longer drawing on his allotted stipend. As spies went, Kenzo wasn't the worst he'd ever encountered. Nor, however, was he the best. That particular title rested with a bald, round man sitting to Shin's left. Master Ito met Shin's gaze and gave a knowing, if surreptitious, smile. He had been quietly observing Kenzo since the other man's arrival, and Shin wondered what he made of the courtier. Ito wore the plain robes of a merchant. Allegedly, he was merely one of the trio of such, whom Shin oversaw on behalf of the Daidoji Trading Council. The three were the sum total of the Crane's interest in the city of the Rich Frog. All three paid a portion of their profits in return for protection, and while they were not family, they were considered vassals. This gave them some advantages when it came to import fees, annual tithes, and the like. Of the three, Ito was the only one whose name Shin could recall without being prompted. There was good reason for that. While Ito endeavored to look soft and unassuming, his guileless demeanor was but a mask hiding a mind sharp enough to draw blood. He'd been of some help to Shin in a previous affair, enough to earn his patron's trust. He knew everything about the city's trading networks, both legal and otherwise, and on his advice, Shin had made several private investments in various local businesses, including the Foxfire Theater. He was also a spy for the Crane, though he had never admitted it in so many words. At Shin's glance, Ito cleared his throat. "Perhaps, my lord, Master Kenzo is the man for the moment. After all, while I have given you what small help I am able, I am but a humble merchant. Surely a man of Master Kenzo's reputation might be able to untangle this particular fiscal knot with ease." Kenzo looked sharply at Ito and said, "What knot might that be?" Despite his lingering frown, there was an undercurrent of curiosity in his voice. Shin indicated the ledgers. "As I'm sure you might have guessed, the finances of this theater were in quite the state when I took on ownership. A tangle of debts, payments, contracts, and such, all of which are now my responsibility. I find such matters tedious, but it must be done." Kenzo's gaze sharpened, and there was a light in his eyes that told Shin he'd read the man right. "Oh, yes, certainly, my lord. But you must have more important matters to attend to, as I said." "Yes, but needs must. I fear I shall be occupied with this matter until it is resolved." Kenzo licked his lips. "Perhaps I might be of service." Shin's eyes widened. "You, Master Kenzo? Why, I wouldn't dream of inflicting such a conundrum upon you, not when you have other duties." "My lord, it would be my privilege. I have often conducted similar audits on behalf of your grandfather, though never, I must admit, for a business such as this." Shin sat back, and Ito gently nudged the stack of ledgers toward Kenzo. The courtier practically rubbed his hands in barely restrained glee. "Never fear, Master Kenzo. I am assured that one business is much like another when it comes to money." Ito coughed politely, and Shin nodded. He rose smoothly, smoothing his own blue kimono with a practiced gesture. "Please, make yourself at home here. I must speak with a certain tradesman regarding a shipment of lanterns. I will return shortly." Kenzo, his mind already on his task, barely remembered to bow as Shin and Ito left the box. Once safely out of earshot, Ito said, "Well played, my lord. Kenzo has something of a reputation as a keen problem solver. Overly keen, in fact." "Easily distractible, you mean?" Shin asked. He snapped open his fan and gave it a twitch, to better disperse the smells of pitch and sawdust that permeated the theater. "Even so, my lord." Ito bowed low, almost obsequiously so. "If you will permit me, I must return to my own labors. I have deliveries to arrange and shipments to contract." Shin waved him on, and Ito departed. He turned to address the figure lurking unobtrusively nearby. "A clever man. I'm glad I realized it before it was too late." The young woman leaning against the wall snorted. "And it only took you a year." She straightened and fixed him with a disapproving eye. "Kenzo?" Shin gestured with his fan. "Happily plying his trade for the moment." "You tricked him." "Me? Don't be absurd, Kasami. Such a thing is beneath me." He started down the creaking stairs towards the stage. Kasami, trotting in his wake, snorted indelicately. Then there was little delicacy and even less tact in Hiramori Kasami. A daughter of the Uebe marshes, she had been born into a vassal family, but now served the Daidoji directly, her skills honed to murderous lethality. She was also his bodyguard, something she complained about often and at length. "That won't keep him occupied for long," she said, her mouth a thin line. It wasn't quite a frown, but neither was it a smile. "Eventually he's going to remember why he was sent here in the first place." "We'll burn that bridge when we come to it," Shin said, watching the laborers haul a joist into place above the stage. "For now, perhaps we can get some use out of our guest." "Cross," Kasami corrected. "What?" "Cross the bridge, not burn it." Shin fanned himself. "Is there a difference?" "Ideally." Her tone bordered on disrespectful, and Shin quirked an eyebrow. "Well, as I always say, a day without learning is a day wasted." He paused, waiting for her reaction. She didn't look at him. "To my knowledge, you have never said that." "Maybe you weren't listening," he countered teasingly. Kasami grunted, but didn't take the bait. Shin sighed. "Still, you are correct, I suppose. I had hoped my grandfather might be content to leave me to my own devices, but I see that I have once more piqued his interest. It's because you're spending too much money." "Technically, I'm not spending any money. Well, any of his money, at any rate." Shin assumed an air of aggrieved innocence. Kasami gave him a level look. "He's probably curious as to where you're getting it." "And I have informed him many times." Another level look from Kasami compelled him to correct himself. "Fine. I have informed him at least once of my various investments. It is hardly my fault that he ignores my existence, save for when I suffer some unforeseen and undeserved embarrassment." He trailed off as he noticed her expression. "What?" "Nothing." Shin peered at her in suspicion. "Are you implying something?" "I would not dream of doing so, my lord," she said, her tone bland and respectful. Shin made to reply when he caught sight of Wada Sanneman, master of the Three-Flower Troupe, the troupe in residence for the Foxfire Theater, hurrying towards them across the stage. My lord, Sanneman called out. He was heavyset, with broad shoulders and a hesitant, nervous manner. He was sweating profusely, as was his custom, and his cheeks were flushed. "My lord," he wheezed as he reached them. Bending over, he braced his hands on his knees, panting. Shin waited politely for him to catch his breath. When Sanneman straightened, Shin said, "How might I be of service, Master Sanneman?" "You have a guest, my lord," Sanneman said. A lady. She wishes to, speak with you in private. I took the liberty of showing her to one of the dressing rooms backstage, just in case. You understand." "A lady?" Shin perked up. "Did she give a name?" Sanneman lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Iyuchi Konomi, my lord." Shin's eyes widened. "Well now, isn't that interesting?" Chapter 2. Iyuchi Konomi. Shin strolled backstage, Sanneman hurrying in his wake, and Kasami trailing behind them both, at a respectful distance. "How goes the day, Master Sanneman? Is the Three-Flower Troupe ready for the new season?" Shin asked, throwing the questions over his shoulder. "Fortune's willing, my lord," Sanneman said. He hesitated, then added, "I cannot thank you enough for this opportunity, my lord. Without your patronage, we would surely have had to disband, especially after, well," he gestured somewhat helplessly. Shin nodded in understanding. Sanneman and his troupe had been involved in a recent incident that had nearly upset the delicate balance of power in the city. Shin had extricated them from the situation and had become their patron in the process. "Yes," he said. "And have you heard from her at all?" He paused. "Okuni, I mean." He added, more artlessly than he'd intended. Okuni was the lead actress of the Three-Flower Troupe, as well as a shinobi of no small skill. She had been at the center of the incident in question, and Shin had only managed to resolve it with her aid. She'd vanished in the aftermath, a wise decision given all that had gone on. Sanneman didn't meet his gaze. "Not for some months. I believe she's returned home." "Ah," Shin forced a smile. "A shame. What is a troupe without its principal actress?" "I wanted to ask you about that, my lord." Sanneman licked his lips nervously. "Might we undertake auditions for a replacement?" Shin glanced at him. "You don't think she's coming back?" Sanneman shrugged. "I know nothing, save that we need a lead actress." "I'm sure Nao would disagree," Shin said, referring to the company's lead actor. "Nao overestimates himself." Shin chuckled softly. "Perhaps, though I will not be the one to say it." He stopped and turned to face Sanneman. "Very well. Hold your auditions with my compliments." "Would you like to attend them, my lord?" Shin briefly considered, then dismissed the idea. "I think not, Master Sanneman. You are the master of the troupe, and it must be your decision." He allowed himself a small smile. "Else, what am I paying you for, after all?" Sanneman blanched slightly, but mustered an appreciative laugh. He was still unsure of his new patron, and Shin often had to restrain his more playful urges. Changing the subject, Sanneman said, "I showed the lady into Nao's dressing room. He's out for the moment, as I thought it would give you the most privacy." "Well done, Master Sandeman. Your forethought does you credit." Ahead of them, a pair of bodyguards in the livery of the unicorn occupied the narrow corridor. Both were armed, though they wore no armor, and their swords were piece-knotted to show that their intentions were peaceful. Sandeman paused. "I'll just leave you to it, shall I, my lord?" Shin nodded absently. "Yes. Oh, and Master Sandeman." "My lord?" "There's a gentleman in my box, attempting to unravel the theater's finances. Would you send someone to see to his needs? Not immediately, but by and by. I'd hate for him to think that we'd forgotten him." Sandeman bowed low. "Of course, my lord." He retreated with as much speed as dignity allowed, and Shin watched him go with a smile. "He's getting better," he murmured. "Still too jumpy for my liking," Kasami said. She looked at him. "He knows more than he's saying. About Okuni. Of course he does. But I see no reason to press the matter. When she is ready, she will return. Or not. As fortune wills. But you hope she does. We need a lead actress. And that's the only reason, obviously." Shin ignored the insinuation and said, "2 guards. She's practically traveling incognito." He indicated the bodyguards with a jerk of his chin. Kasami studied them for a moment before replying. "She doesn't want to draw attention to herself." "Interesting, don't you agree?" "Dangerous," Kasami said. "She is a friend, you know." "Even worse," Kasami frowned. "Why do you think she's here?" "Maybe she wishes to chat." Kasami peered at him. Shin fluttered his fan dismissively. "Fine, yes. She probably wants something." He tapped his chin with the fan. "Still, we won't find out what it is by standing here, will we? Come on." The taller of the 2 bodyguards, a woman, bowed shallowly as Shin approached. She kicked her companion in the ankle, and he hastily followed suit. Shin inclined his head politely, acknowledging their greeting. "Kasami, wait here, if you please." Wordlessly, Kasami took up a position opposite the 2 bushi. Shin was relieved to see that she kept her hand away from her swords, instead folding her arms over her chest. Shin snapped his fan shut, and the first bodyguard slid open the dressing-room door. Shin entered to find that he was late to the conversation. Iyuchi Konomi sat demurely on a hard bench across from a tall, effete man, clad in an ornate kimono the color of sunset. The man was in the midst of telling an amusing story, and Konomi was giggling raucously behind her fan. They fell silent as Shin entered, and both pairs of eyes swiveled towards him. "Lady Konomi," Shin said with a polite bow. He inclined his head to the room's other occupant. "And Master Nao. I'd heard you were out for the day." "I was, but I returned to find her ladyship ensconced in my poor excuse for a dressing-room." He clucked his tongue in disappointment. "Sandeman has no sense of decorum. To leave a lady such as this here, and with no company to entertain her." "You have performed in that regard remarkably well, Master Nao," Konomi interjected. She was a tall woman, and sturdily built, the sort of woman made for arduous rides in full armor across hostile terrain. Shin had heard that she'd once stabbed a particularly obnoxious suitor with a paring knife, though he was not so gauche as to ask her about the incident. She gave a polite twitch of her lips. "We have been having a most fascinating conversation while we waited for you, Lord Shin." Nao tittered. The actor was, for the moment, the most skilled member of the three-flower troupe. He often played multiple parts in plays, and had achieved some small celebrity for his aptitude for shifting from one role to the next in full view of the audience, as well as his ability to transition seamlessly from the more popular, bombastic style of acting to a gentler, more realistic performance. Shin, who had spent many hours in conversation with Nao over the preceding months, found him good company. Though he made no claim to noble birth, the actor was clearly more than familiar with the rules, enough, at least, to flout them in a most charming fashion. "You flatter me, my lady," he said. "I am but a humble thespian, doing his best to entertain his betters." "There's something I never thought to hear, you referring to anyone as your better," Shin said. Nao glanced at him, eyes narrowing slightly. Shin's smile did not slip, and Nao looked away, the picture of insulted dignity. The actor rose and, straightening his kimono, made for the door. "On that note, I shall take my leave, my lord and lady, with your permission, of course." "And with my compliments," Shin said, taking over Nao's seat. Nao gave a sharp laugh and slid the door shut behind himself, leaving Shin and Konomi alone. They sat in silence for several moments. Shin studied her, and she returned the favor. He restrained a smile. Conversation with Konomi was often much like a duel. It began slowly, with a wary circling of the participants. Whoever spoke first was often at a disadvantage. Finally, Konomi broke the stalemate. "It has been some time since last we spoke," she murmured softly, her mouth hidden behind her fan. Shin leaned forward so as to better hear her. "I regret that my responsibilities have kept me from fulfilling my social obligations of late, my lady. Now that you have reminded me, I shall endeavor to correct my failing." Konomi gave a throaty chuckle. "It was not a criticism, Shin, merely an observation, and you may dispense with formality unless it pleases you to do otherwise." Shin grinned. "I forget sometimes the value you unicorns place on plain speaking. It depends entirely on who's doing the talking." Konomi snapped her fan closed and made a show of looking around. "I like what you're doing with the place. I'm pleased it meets with your approval. I look forward to attending the first performance. I shall ensure your customary box is waiting for you." Konomi inclined her head in thanks. "Still, it must be quite arduous, overseeing all of this. I've heard it said that theaters are but cities in miniature, with their own laws and factions." Shin scratched his chin. "There are frustrations, to be sure. For instance, at the moment we are lacking a manager, which means that I, myself, must play the role, unfit as I am for a position of such responsibility." "Could you not simply delegate the more onerous duties to some trustworthy individual?" she asked, and Shin detected a second, unspoken question shadowing the first. He paused before replying. "It is possible, though it would require such an individual to be found. A not insurmountable task for one as resourceful as yourself." "No, not insurmountable, though I would have to have good reason, I fear." He tapped his chin with his fan. "And while an escape from tedium is an excuse, it is not a reason." He studied her openly, waiting for her to make the next move. "Just why did you buy a theater, Shin?" The question took him aback for a moment. "A good investment," he began. Konomi twitched a finger. "A terrible investment, whatever the context. Theaters do not fill purses, they empty them. Even the meanest hinin knows this. I find it strange that you would burden yourself thus." "Perhaps I like a challenge." "That I believe. I also believe that you are bored." "And why might that be?" "When was the last time Tetsuo called for you?" Shin frowned. "A few weeks ago. A small matter of a stolen jade shipment." Konomi nodded, and from her expression, Shin knew that she was fully aware of the incident in question. There was little in the city that escaped her notice. Her spies were, if not superior to Master Ito, then certainly more numerous. "And since?" Shin sighed. "You are correct. Of late, the city has been somewhat quiet." "Boring, you mean?" "Not the word I'd use." Shin gestured. "Sedate, I'd say. Calm." "Peaceful?" Shin laughed. "Never that." The city of the rich frog was theoretically a tripartite assemblage. 3 clans, the unicorn, the lion, and the dragon, claimed mastery of it, and had divided it between themselves, using the Three Sides River and the Drowned Merchant River as natural borders. The other clans had their representatives, of course, but mostly kept out of the affairs of the city, where possible. in Imperial Governor Miya Tetsuya.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?